personal connections that he has made with everybody. And that's what's so special about him, right? It's the people at Westminster that make the difference in those personal connections. And Clarence has really just left a legacy about that. Before I turn it over to Clarence has something special to share. There is a message from the administration. I'll turn it over to Matt Stinson.
I appreciate that. I apologize. I did a little too much screaming at the football game yesterday. And we had our homecoming weekend, so we had alumni back from the class of 1949 all the way up to alumni that graduated last year. And it's interesting every time you have those conversations. When they think about Westminster, you know, they always think about two different things. Their common stories, their classmates and people who they've stayed in touch with or lost touch with, but felt very strongly about and formed great bonds. But the other thing that they always point back to is a faculty member or a coach or a band director or somebody that absolutely made an instrumental difference in their life, probably more so than the student realized at that time. And then later on in life, wow, that's really impactful. What's beautiful about Westminster is that those bonds go on for a very long time and stay in touch. So obviously Clarence is that person for you here today. I know we have some alumni here. I know we have community members here, community members that work out here. Thank you so much. It's a lot of acres to keep up. Clarence can do a lot. He can't do everything by himself though. But I'm Matt Stinson, Vice President for Institutional Advancement, and I just wanted to bring greetings and wishes on behalf of President Richardson. As I said, it's homecoming alumni weekend, and she can only be in so many places at one time. She's also a member of the Presbyterian Church in the choir here this morning, so she would have come and sing for you, but that probably wouldn't be appropriate. So. Thank you all so much for coming. I won't go into details now, but talk to Helen in the coming weeks. There's a whole bunch of surprises coming this guy's way during the week, and I'm sure you'll want to be a part of that. So, thank you, Helen.
Clarence, all you.
Well, and again, hey, thank you. I didn't realize that many people knew me. It is good to see you and to reconnect a little bit over here. The field station has become not just my home, but it's sort of become a part of me as we've worked through this and that over here together with faculty members. I see the family of Bob Travis here. Well, there's John Robertson, who chairs the department. Joe Belzon, Ann Throckmorton is here. Diana Ortiz is here. Did I miss anybody?
Carrie Dewar, Carolyn Cobb.
Yeah. There we are, Carrie. The field station sits across the road from a big white oak tree. And my relationship with that tree has grown over the years. I first set foot on this property about 1979. I had been here 10 years before I realized that this was a part of the college. It was called the Offutt Farm in those days, and the college bought it, interestingly, for you and others. There was no particular reason they bought them. It was just available, and they bought it from the Offutts, from Bill and Virginia Offutt. Biology department made proposals and was eventually given the custodianship of this 50-acre area for reasons that we had given. And the only problem was we didn't have any money to do anything. That's sort of typical. Sometimes we give approval but no funding. We did get funding in a variety of ways, and that's what has made this the place that it is. Need to make special notice of Lucille Fry, who real old-timers would know because virtually every student at Westminster went through her class. I overlapped 1 year with Mrs. Fry. We named a trail for her, and out of the goodness of her heart upon her death, we were able to do the remodeling of this room and other places out here and want to recognize her. I also want to recognize Peggy Cox, who was an artist. Every class that she brought out in nature art made a sketch of the tree across the road. It was a beautiful symbol, not just of this area, but of the kind of resilience that a white oak, that's pretty old, has done. If you'd like to see a picture of what Peggy drew at a gallery show, you may pick one of these up afterwards. This is Peggy's artwork on the white oak tree across the road. I became interested in the seasons through which that tree has moved. And over the past year and a half, I took photos of that same tree from about the same spot during the spring, summer, fall, and winter through its 4 seasons. And then I sat down and began to put some of the specifications, some of the details of that tree together, and that is on a plaque below that, which represents the way a scientist might approach something. These are the facts. I have the latitude and longitude there. I have some of the dimensions. I have a little bit of a quote from Carl Linné, who in his Species Plantarum gave name, an official name to that tree. So that wasn't for me a complete picture of the tree, because I wanted to tap in to what has become an important part of this field station, and that is the total liberal arts, the humanities, and what means. Science can tell us what is. It's the artist who tells us what it means. And so one night, about in the middle of the night when I was not sleeping very well, I started to do some writing, and I would not call this a bit of poetry, I would call it a bit of awkward verse. And before I read it, I want to introduce my family. Danette, who is over here doing some work, she is the artist and helped me do the arrangement over here. I also want to recognize my son Dwayne and his wife Cheryl and my granddaughter Anna, who came from Atlanta just for this occasion today. I'm going to read this, but you have to promise me. And yes, and there's Chance. Yeah, Chance has done some work around the field station, notably driving the gators around. When I showed this to my daughter Danette, I said, "Now, don't laugh." Guess what the first thing she did when she saw it? So, you can laugh if you want. I do not claim this to be poetry. It is awkward verse. So let me read it, and I'm going to read it twice. First time I'm going to annotate some of my feelings and some of the ways in which I see science and art having different expressions of how things would go. This will go on the wall just below that plaque over there, titled Lonely Oak, 4 Seasons. This lonely oak, much wider than high, seeks nothing but to touch the sky. Its branches bent, its trunks a-tattered, its path to life was all that mattered. Now in that first verse, I start out with something that is definitely not a scientific statement. A scientist would never describe a tree as lonely. If it was all by itself, it might be described as solitary, but not. Lonely brings about a kind of emotion. So I'm tapping into the emotional side of that tree over here. The fact that it is wider than it's high is an interesting phenomenon. The artist would take a look at the picture and say, yeah, I can see that it's wider than it's high. The scientist would want to know how much. And it turns out the tree is 105 feet from what we call the drip point, the widest part. And it's about 61 feet high. So much wider. The scientist would use one expression, numbers. The poet might say much in that way. The seeking is not a scientific word. The tree does not seek. It responds to stimuli of sunlight and moisture. And the tree itself, we use the expression anthropomorphic to state when we're putting human feelings into non-human objects. Its path to life was all that mattered. Scientists would talk about natural selection and about survival of the fittest and those kinds of things. So I go back and forth thinking about the role of science and the role of the humanities. This lonely oak from an acorn buried or fell at a spot in a forest. Then it gave quite a yell. It demanded its place in the big universe that would in time be for better or worse. Now, you and I know that a tree is not going to yell in the literal sense of the word, but that's what every creature does. It moves, it grows, it wiggles its way. It demands something in the world of nature in that sense. Acorns, as you know, will fall. Sometimes they are buried by squirrels or other animals and will grow. And that old tree started out that way, as an acorn that either fell from a tree and sat there and germinated, or it was buried in the course of time. This lonely oak, we know 'tis true, was an acorn that split open and birthed anew radical one, cotyledons two. Okay. I'm talking about a radical in the sense of a political or religious statement. The radical is the name of the embryonic root. As a seed germinates, it pushes out a root. That's called the radical, and it's even spelled different than the radical politician over here. There are embryonic tissues that provide the nutrient for any seed to get started. And those are called cotyledons. Corn is a monocot, it has one cotyledon. Oaks have two, so it's called a dicot. And it has two embryonic roots that last long enough until photosynthesis can kick in to produce the food, the energy needed over there. So a little bit of teaching moment here on biology.
The professor's still.
This lonely oak next grew a shoot with stems, leaves, and root. All parts in the making till flowers would grow. Acorns abundant that wait for the snow. You need to know that oaks make flowers. They do. They're not the showy flowers of daisies and buttercups and so forth, but they are indeed flowers. They have the important parts, the sexual parts, that will make for the next generation. A fruit, by definition, is a matured ovary that has one or more seeds on the inside of it. In the case of oak, it's an ovary that has only one seed inside, and that unit we call an acorn. This lonely oak, acorn to fruited tree, we now know it's a fruited tree, grew and grew as it endured for me. To know its cycles, 4 seasons for sure, each different, each special as we follow the tour. I'm putting human feelings into that tree as it waited around a good long time for me to get to know it a little bit, and I've been around that tree and under it. I have not climbed that tree. If I were a bit younger, I might have tried that at a point, but oak trees are beautiful to climb. They have the branches and make it for children who want to do that kind of thing. This lonely oak, Quercus alba by Linnaeus, would spring with the green, its leaves were so many. That's sort of a crude rhyming there, Linnaeus and many, but you have to excuse me on that, I'm not a poet. Thus would spring with the green, its leaves were so many. Then summer and shade to prep for the fall, when leaves colored all. And we know the events of fall happening right now where the leaves are turning color, the beauty that's there. They're doing it not because it froze last night. It did. We had 30.7. I checked our Travis weather game this morning, and we had our first frost of the year. That's not what makes a leaf fall. Leaf falls because of the shortening of the daylight. And under hormone control within the plant, it forms a layer between the base of the leaf and the trunk, and it loses its connection of circulation. No longer brings nutrients in or shoves things out, and it is ready to fall. The coloring is partly simply the decay of the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll no longer is prominent. The other pigments will shine forth and sometimes even multiply in abundance. The reds and the yellows and the browns are all of the making of stuff that was in the leaf before it shut off. This lonely oak braved each winter's stop as a time to redress, to recoup, and to talk to nature and people through wind and through cold. And in all of this, it was moving toward old. The age of that tree is quite a phenomenon. Just this past 2 months, I've been engaged in trying to figure out how old it is. Besides, the poet would say just moving toward old, but that's not enough. You want to know how old it is. Well, the society, the International Society of Silviculture, has developed formulas for different species, and they give them a growth factor. And in the case of the white oak, the growth factor is 5. And the way they worked that formula was to take the diameter of a tree in inches. Why they didn't use metric, I don't know, but they used inches. Take the diameter of the tree times the growth factor. So do a quick number over here. 5 times, and it's 64 inches in diameter, further than I can reach. It's over 5 feet in diameter. That tree verges on 300 years old. For you Pennsylvanians, that's when William Penn was moving around on the other side of the state. He got his charter, and he was doing some things over there. This tree was a baby in the period of William Penn, so it's old. This lonely oak was to songbirds and owls, to white-tailed deer, horses and cows, and that's again a little owls to cows, fuzzy in the metric over there. A refuge, a home, and a stay from the weather, and if we could see them, they lived well together. At a time, this was simply a forest, and of course, probably no cows, horses around at that time, but during the period of time when that oak tree was young, there was no road here as such. So as development occurred, the old maps, the very old maps show a dirt road between what is now 208 and the little village of Fayette over here. That tree grew up in that era, and if we could tap into its memory bank, it would be beautiful to know all the horses and cows and white-tailed deers and owls and songbirds that have made it a home. This lovely, lonely oak, and I'm using an emotional term, lovely, will someday move on to timber, to firewood, or rotting by spawn, to nature, to cycles and change. And with all of this, we should never feel strange. I had some difficulty with that last verse over here, and I think in retrospect it says as much about me as it does about that tree. You know, time to move on. I'm hoping that there will be some timber recovered in you people, this building. I don't think we should ever have a brand new nature center. This old barn built in 1877, we know that to be a fact, does well as it sits here now. I know realistically that a lot of what I've done will be firewood that gets burned up, and let me give you a little bit of an insight into what I mean by the word spawn in that verse. Spawn is the term that we use to apply to this white cottony filamentous growth of fungi that permeates a tree that's rotting from the inside. Before you see a mushroom growing out of the soil, or before you see a bracket, if you go back there to one of the display cases, there's a large bracket fungus that grew on a cherry tree on the main campus. By the time something like that appears, the fungus has grown throughout almost all of the tree. All it waits for is a wind, and it will topple. Again, a teaching moment here. When a mushroom or a bracket on a tree grows, it produces spores. That's something we can all appreciate. Here's what happens. There are two kinds of spores that are produced. You can't tell them apart. One is a plus and one's a minus. That's all the terminology that we use. They're genetically different. That's what we can say. A plus spore will fall and it will begin to grow, and a minus spore will begin to grow, and all of a sudden they will touch. And when they touch, something magic, again not a scientific word, happens. The nuclei, plus, minus, come to occupy a single cell. And repeatedly, as that cell divides, it will have two nuclei in it. That's the spawn that grows throughout the soil when you see a mushroom growing or bracket on a tree. And that can last for 30, 40, 50 years or more. Each time the cell divides, both nuclei independently divide to occupy the new cell. When you finally see the structure of a mushroom or a bracket, that's when the final fusing of the two nuclei takes place, what we often call fertilization. That's when they become one nucleus. And they will immediately divide to form the four spores, 2 plus and 2 minus. That's the spawn we're talking about over here. I had problems with finding a word that rhymed with change. I did a computer search of words that rhymed, and I kept coming back to the word strange. And I think it's a good word. We should never feel that when nature does something that it's out of ordinary. It is ordinary for a tree to grow and finally to become saturated with the spawn and move on. So the word strange came to be the word that I chose, and I want to give you two examples of how I'm going to feel strange on the 2nd of January. I started teaching carrying keys 62 years ago. So I had 50 years at Westminster and 12 before I came here. I'm going to feel very strange when I don't have a wad in my pocket of the keys. My family would know that I protected my keys. They were not allowed to play with them. My oldest son did, and one morning when I was getting ready to go to work, I couldn't find my keys. And I struggled and tried to, I asked him, no. Well, we had a furnace at that house that had a register, a hot air register, and he was playing with the keys and they dropped inside. So we did find them. And even more recently, within the past 2 years, I had an incident of, where are my keys? At that point, my wife was recovering from surgery. She broke her femur and then broke it again in the lower part, same bone, this time much worse. I made a habit when she was in the rehab program at Golden Hill and Newcastle of getting into bed with her and lying down, and my keys must have fallen out of my pocket. Couldn't find them the next day. I struggled borrowing keys from people who might let me in here and other places. And I asked around over there, nobody had seen them. I retraced every step from the last time I had entered the bio office in Hoyt, no keys. Walking out of Golden Hill one day, the woman said, "Are you the guy who wanted keys?" So I have my keys, and I intend to hold on to them until the 2nd of January. And then I'm going to feel strange, I think. Okay. Well, you put up with me. I'm going to read this one more time straight through, and then you're allowed to laugh. This lonely oak, much wider than high, seeks nothing but to touch the sky. Its branches bent, its trunk a-tattered, its path to life is all that mattered. This lonely oak from an acorn buried or fell at a spot in the forest, and it gave quite a yell. It demanded its place in the big universe that would in time be for better or worse. This lonely oak, we know 'tis true, was an acorn that split open and birthed anew. Radical 1, cotyledons 2. Now you know what a radical is. This lonely oak next grew a shoot with stem, leaves, and root. All parts in the making till flowers would grow, acorns abundant that wait for the snow. This lonely oak, acorn to fruited tree, grew and grew as it endured for me to know its cycles, 4 seasons for sure, each different, each special, as we follow the tour. This lonely oak, Quercus alba by Linnaeus, would spring with the green, its leaves were so many. Then summer and shade to prep for the fall when leaves colored all. This lonely oak braved each winter's stop as a time to redress, to recoup and to talk to nature and people, through wind and through cold. And in all of this, it was growing toward old. This lonely oak was to songbirds and owls, to white-tailed deer, horses and cows, a refuge, a home, a stay from the weather, and if we could see them, they lived well together. This lovely, lonely oak will someday move on to timber, to firewood, or rotting by spawn, to nature, to cycles and change. And with all of this, we should never feel strange. There you have it. Thank you. You may laugh now. Here's the picture of Peggy Cox's, in addition to what we have on the wall over there. This was in the gallery at Westminster. Okay. Thank you.